the younger people here. One of those kind of original madmen from the 1960s world of advertising. They're founding of Saatchi & Saatchi, one of the great advertising agencies. A close friend and advisor to Mrs. Thatcher, winning 3 general elections, worked for an extraordinary array of people, from de Klerk in South Africa through to Murdoch, people like that. Met everyone from Ronald Reagan to Princess Diana. He is, as all the reviews of his book, which is what in large part tonight is about, whatever people say about him or think about him, he is honest, unashamedly right-wing, and certainly in my experience, very, very charming. It was once said about him that he's so charming that dogs cross the road to be patted by him. But he also has quite a firm, hard side. Anyway, thank you very much indeed for coming along, Tim.
It's my pleasure.
In your book, Rachel.
Hello, incidentally. Hello, Michael.
Hello. Awful lot of people here you met.
I know.
From Ayn Rand. Is that the right way of saying it?
Ayn Rand.
Ayn Rand, yes, yeah. The American-Russian philosopher wrote Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged and things like that. And she said, and you obviously found this interesting, you put it in here, there are 2 sides to every issue. One side is right and the other is wrong. But the middle is always evil.
That's right.
Do you believe that?
Absolutely.
And has that sort of guided your life and your political views?
Well, it's just a point of view. It's a point of view that I have, which is that the difference between right and wrong is quite obvious. Most people seem to know the difference between right and wrong. But over time, people start to adjust their positions, and so they say something is partly right or partly wrong, and actually they can't be. They're either right or they're wrong. The middle, which is the bit in the middle, the compromise, is always wrong because it's not the best of both worlds, it's the worst of both worlds. Political punters nowadays, notably Tony Blair actually over the weekend, and it was his life philosophy, said that you can only win an election from the centre ground, and that is just absolute rubbish. Because we won 3 in a row from the right, and we were then followed by, I suppose, a middle ground politician in John Major, and then followed by Blair, who basically lied.
Lied
about everything. In fact, Charles Thatcher and I used to have a joke about David Putnam. We used to say, "Hello, he lied." And I've always thought that was true of Tony Blair. I say this to his face, incidentally. It's not just said when he's not listening.
No, you say it to people's faces.
I do.
In the book, you say that you think that in the UK, the left has won. A sort of left view dominates the BBC, the arts, the NHS. I mean, some people would say the evidence would point the other way, that socialism's rather devalued as a term, the Labour Party stick away from it, that there's lots of global trade, indeed the centre is where the political axis is. So why do you think, what makes you believe that the left has taken over and won?
If you look at all the conflicts that take place, of which there are many, in fact there are more today probably than there have been for a long time, they are nearly always a difference of opinion between a view on the right and a view on the left. And they end up with somebody doing a deal, which means they have a bit of it and a bit of that, a bit of the other, and therefore nobody is satisfied. And in the long run, all that happens is life just gets worse and worse.
But if I was comparing Britain today with Britain, say, in the 1970s, I would say it was much further to the right than to the left. Do you not feel that was part of Thatcher's legacy?
I never knew whether Margaret was the last throw of the right or the first throw of a new era. I fairly quickly found out because she was immediately replaced by John Major. And then later replaced by Blair. And you had 13 years of Conservative rule, followed by 13 years of whatever you call him. I mean, he was all things to all people. Never had any conviction of any kind at all. And that was probably the difference between her and him, in that she actually believed in some things. Now, whether you agree with what she believed in or not, it's entirely up to everybody to make their own mind up. That's the wonderful thing about being a human being. You're free to make a choice. And I would like people to go on being free to make a choice. And I think the only way you can be sure that that will happen is if you let the right have a big say in what happens, so that they actually confront people with choice. They're not bribed into thinking a way they don't think. They're not compromised in everything that they do. They're actually allowed to just be free. The definition of a conservative, written by an American, actually I've forgotten his name, that's in the book, is the view that people wish to live free in a civil society. David Cameron keeps calling it a civic society, which is probably what he does believe, but it is actually a civil society. And a civil society has three characteristics. People act with restraint, they act with honour, and they act to a moral code. Not somebody else's moral code, but their own moral code of what is right and what is wrong. And that's where right and wrong comes into it.
Do you think that the right-wing view has been a bit silenced in the UK, perhaps because of a left bias in the media, and that would explain the rise of something like UKIP, that people are frustrated?
I think what happened in this country is that the two big parties, the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, are already coalitions. They are coalitions of people who are on the left of the right, or on the right of the right, if you can follow this, or the right of the left, or the left of the left, and the coalitions sit reasonably comfortably with each other. When Margaret drew up her first cabinet, she had to put certain people in certain positions because that kept the balance between what she called wets and dries. Nobody here will ever remember those words, but they were called wets and dries. And the wets were people who gave in, who were weedy, didn't do anything, and the dries were the people who invented what Theresa May so accurately called the nasty party.
Yeah. And
it's unfortunate that she called it that, but that is what it is.
This is one of those. She said what was in her mind, which perhaps sometimes is unfortunate in our terms. What about the EU? Slight surprise in the book. I was expecting you to kind of come out very firmly about the EU, and you didn't seem to. I mean, what would your view be about a referendum? Would it matter if we left, or
it wouldn't matter a damn? It wouldn't matter a damn whether we stay in or whether we go. It's going to be there whether we like it or not. At the moment, what Europe is a superpower without an army and without any money, trying to throw its weight around and tell everybody else how they should live their lives. They're busy telling the people in Ukraine how they should live their lives. They're looking to expand the European Union a little bit further into Russia so they can fight off the Russian threat. The Russians, meanwhile, are stomping around in bits and pieces of land at the edge of their country because they don't want to have missiles pointing at them. And the American, which is a superpower with a lot of money and a lot of soldiers, but actually not much will to fight anybody at the moment. And the Russians have a determination to fight everybody. They also have a very big army. It's a bit old-fashioned. There was a lovely joke about Putin going to Brisbane for the G20, and he arrived with 3 battle cruisers. And the Navy joke was, were they going to sink on the way there or on the way back? Because they were so rusty and useless. But I mean, we happen to live in a world where there are 4 superpowers: America, Russia, Europe, and China. I personally think Britain would be better off not being part of the European superpower. I can't see what benefit we gain from it. I listen to Nick Clegg. Actually, I don't listen to Nick Clegg. I ignore everything he says. But on occasions when I can't turn the sound down, I have to notice that he keeps talking about 3 million jobs we're going to lose, which is utter rubbish. We're not going to lose 3 million jobs. We might lose a couple 100,000. We're going to lose 30% of our trade. That's absolute drivel. They'll all carry on trading with us, whether we're part of the European Union or not. Switzerland, which isn't a member of the European Union, pays 150 million euros a year to be able to trade with all of the other European countries on equal terms. That's peanuts compared to what we have to pay.
So you'd be perfectly happy?
I would be perfectly happy. I mean, look, it's a fact of life. It's there. It was started in order to stop a war taking place in Europe, because there had been 2 terrible wars in Europe. And the original idea of the European Union, actually its founding principle, which was not freedom of movement, its founding principle was that there should be no war in Europe. And there hasn't been a war in Europe. There is beginning to be wars in Europe now, not actually amongst the European Union themselves. And all the other things that have been invented were all part of a political view that you wanted to have a federal Europe. And it was a union, in a real sense of the word, it was a union that was about collective bargaining. So the idea was that if all these European states joined together, they could collectively bargain with everybody else and be on all fours with the Americans, all fours with the Russians, all fours with the Chinese. I don't think we went into it knowing that's what we were going into. I think we went into it, we thought it was going to stop wars in Europe. Actually, during Thatcher's years, the Single Market Act was passed, and various other treaties that all of them have turned what was a loose coalition of countries that did something in all their best interest, which was to trade with each other. It's now doing things that are not in their best interest. They're trying to make the military become a cross-Europe military. They're trying to make the politicians who are not elected who run Europe, and you must remember that. And people will sort of say it very casually that it's run by the Council of Ministers. It's not. It's run by the bureaucrats in Brussels and Strasbourg.
So if you were advising Cameron, as you advised Lady Thatcher or Mrs. Thatcher, as she then was, how would you advise him, to play the EU issue?
Well, he's got a problem because he's got to keep his party together. Because there is also, as well as there is a view about the 2 big parties being coalitions, there's also a view that they need to be balanced, and you need to come to a view that accommodates all the different ranges of opinion. And that's, of course, the reason why UKIP has emerged, because they got the balance wrong. Cameron is a wet, and he's on the left-hand side of the party. He believes in social justice and all that kind of rubbish. He believes in all that, and I'm sure he believes in it very fervently and with great strength. But he managed to become leader of the party because he read a speech without notes, which is an extraordinary thing, actually, that somebody should become the leader of a political party simply because he did a speech without any notes and border prompt. I mean, it's amazing, really. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. If I came to you from another planet and I said to you, the way you're going to choose your political leader is whether you can make a speech without a border prompt.
It's kind of like an X Factor competition, really, wasn't it?
It was very much like an X Factor, yeah.
Interesting to see how Ed Miliband would have faced up.
Well, he tried it the other day.
Yes.
And he forgot half the bloody speech as a result of it.
Just kind of going back to this thing of right and wrong and the middle being evil, there is again a point in the book where you talk about that people no longer want greatness. They're fed up with greatness. All they seem to look for is greyness. But I have to, when I read that, I thought I'd rather have Hollande than Putin. Isn't greyness sometimes a good thing? And greatness, I mean, certainly Russians think Putin is great.
Yes, they do.
And he's monstering much of Europe at the moment.
And they are human beings, just like everybody else in this room. And they think he's great. They think he stands up for his country. They think that he cares about his country. They think that it's making it a better place. We're all trained through the media and through propaganda to understand that he's not doing that. He's making it a worse place, and that he's a bad person. But actually, he's a perfectly good person. He just happens to be rather violent. He's never really got over the end of Eastern Germany, because he ran the Stasi in East Germany. He was in charge of all of that, and he had to give in, and he's going to take his revenge. I mean, actually, Angela Merkel really should look to her back, because she keeps being friendly with him, flirting with him, and he will in the end stab her.
Do you think that the public generally, that they're initially attracted to greatness like they were attracted to Mrs. Thatcher, and then there's a sort of reaction, an inevitable reaction. You go through that sort of exciting relationship, and then you want a little bit of calm, and then maybe after however many years, 10, 20 years, people then want some more excitement.
Well, I don't think they've got the choice, really. I mean, after her, there were just a whole collection of pygmies. There wasn't anybody great. They didn't have a choice. They got people who weren't great. because there aren't any great people.
Well, are there any
No.
world leaders, apart from possibly Putin and, you know, sort of mine, that you respected?
I think there are leaders of countries, not of the world, leaders of countries who are great, and there have been leaders of countries who have gone on to give a leadership stance to the world. Nelson Mandela is an obvious example, and there are one or two others, but very few and far between.
You mentioned Nelson Mandela. You talk very affectionately and proudly in the book about the work you did with President de Klerk, who was the man who freed Mandela, or brought around democracy in South Africa, for which he won a Nobel Prize, but probably largely forgotten. Do you think history will be kind to somebody like de Klerk, or do you think there's an inevitability that he will become a footnote?
I think he will occupy a big position in history, because he did actually enable the whole process of the abolition of apartheid, which was one of the most evil things that mankind's ever thought of. We're beginning to do it again now. The Israelis are now trying to do it with the Palestinians. We don't ever learn anything. We just reinvent the wheel time and time again. It rolls around and it squashes our feet, and we carry on doing it. I don't know why, but we do. And maybe that's just because I've got old and tired that I feel like this, but I'm just back from Dubai, actually, which is why I'm a bit slightly not on good form at the moment, because I've just got off a plane and I'm feeling a bit sleepy. I might nod off while I'm talking to you, actually. But and when you go to places like Dubai, and you see a country that's run by a dictator, or effectively a dictator, and which uses immigrant labour, but doesn't give them any civil status to build things and do things, you start wondering about whether your system is a good system or a bad system. And I think there is a sort of an inevitable problem that people keep saying, well, the answer is democracy. There's a very famous story about a guy who was the trade attaché in the Moscow embassy, the American embassy in Moscow, at the end of the Second World War. And he wrote a telegram to the president. When you were in the State Department, you didn't write telegrams unless they only had 4 words or 6 words. He wrote a 48-page telegram to the president to make sure that it went to him and didn't go into the State Department to get shredded. And in it he said, Mr. President, at this moment you think that your greatest ally in the world is Russia, because together with Russia you've defeated the forces of the Axis and you've got rid of Nazism. What you don't realise is that the day after you sign the peace treaty, they will become your greatest enemy. And you will have only 3 choices. And I'm telling you this story because one of them is what American foreign policy is now and has been ever since that moment. He said, you can either fight them, which I don't think I would if I was you, because your blokes are a bit tired and they've used up all their weapons. You can give in, but I don't fancy being you sitting on television saying, I've decided to join the Soviet Union. I don't think the American people will clap. The third alternative is what I shall call the principle of containment, where, because the communists are committed to turning the entire world into the Soviet Union. And so every time you see communism, you've got to go and fight it. And that's why they fought in Vietnam, why they fought in Korea, why they fought in Colombia. And all they've done, since probably Bush, I suppose, is cross out the word communist and put the word terrorist instead. So now they have a policy of containment of terrorism. The trouble is you can't contain terrorism, because terrorism is frightening. You can contain communism because you can negotiate with it and you can reach a deal which says, right, you won't go any further than that. You can sit there on the 39th parallel, or whatever it was between North and South Korea, and you can sit there and stare at each other and point guns at each other. And every now and then you'll have an insurgence or an insurrection. Somebody will shoot somebody. It'll all be a bit unpleasant. But actually you'll maintain the status quo, the stability you want.
But what would you recommend? I mean, I can see where the analysis is coming from, but what would you recommend in its place then? What should they have done?
I personally think that if you're, I'm not trying to run the world. I don't think Cameron runs the world. I don't think any British politician runs the world. His job is to run Britain. I know exactly what Britain should do. I don't know what it is that the world should do. The world's a much more complex place, and it's made up of lots and lots of different countries with lots and lots of different intentions, motivations, and whatever. But, you know, in this country, democracy is going to disappear in the course of the next 6 months, because the one thing I'll guarantee everybody in this room is you won't get the government that you vote for. You'll get some hybrid which will be made up of 14 Scots Nats, a couple of Plaid Cymru, 1 Green, 3 something else, no, 2 Greens, 3 something else's, and a few Labour politicians. Or you'll get the Conservatives in a loose coalition with Nigel Farage, who actually may or may not be an MP by then, plus a couple of Ulster Unionists, and you'll have another coalition. And that, again, what you won't get is anybody winning 50% of the vote. And that is actually what democracy says.
So what we would get then, of course, is something in the middle. It may not be what...
What you got in the middle was what Cameron did to get the job. Cameron did the coalition at the beginning of this last government's term because he wanted to be in Downing Street, and because Clegg wanted to be in Downing Street as well. He wanted to walk around saying, "We are the party of government." The most pompous, dishonest crap I've ever heard in my life. The Liberals are the party of government. And it's just a joke. And he allowed that. He formed a coalition with a centre-left party. So he had a centre-right party, which is what the Conservative Party is, and a centre-left party, a very small centre-left party, which on occasions can out-socialist the socialists. On other occasions, it's sort of just slightly drier version of Miliband.
You've raised Clegg and Miliband, interesting, and discussed Cameron as well. In the book, again, you talk particularly during the 80s, where there was a point where you had to have bodyguards, IRA attacks and miners' strike. I mean, a very dangerous time. Politicians permanently live in that world now. They are surrounded by security. They're chauffeured everywhere. Their opportunity to...
They always sit in the front. Have you noticed that? Because they want to be like ordinary people, so they sit in the front. It's the most dangerous place in a car to sit, is in the front passenger seat. That's where all the people who get killed in cars get killed in the front passenger seat. But they're so determined to show that they're in touch with ordinary people that they sit in the front of the car.
Surrounded by their security people and their chauffeur. Is it, I mean, what happens now? I mean, politicians are so cut off from ordinary people. The few people they get to speak to are generally carefully selected, and they're shocked, most politicians, when they meet somebody completely normal and unguarded. I mean, is it possible for politicians to be in touch with people in a normal way? I mean, Ed Miliband can't get on the tube now. He can't walk around the streets unmolested, nor Clegg or whatever.
I don't think they should be able to walk around the streets unmolested. I think they should be molested. I think they should shout at them. I mean, you know, I don't think hiding away from the people who vote for you is necessarily a particularly clever thing to do. Boris Johnson doesn't. That's why he's so popular.
Yes, he's an extraordinary thing. Maybe we can perhaps come back to that. And he doesn't seem to actually be surrounded by kind of security details. But I mean, I think it would be dangerous for Miliband or Clegg or Cameron. I mean, and people like Cameron certainly would be, a serious terrorist target, which must curtail his ability to meet and talk to normal people and get a feel for what's going on.
There's a wonderful picture of Richard Nixon when he went to Belgium, and he was walking down the Avenue Louise, and there are crowds on either side of the road, and he's walking along and he's looking at his watch. And he's looking at his watch, and the caption says, "Nixon meets the ordinary Belgian people." And he's looking at his watch to see when he can go, what time his next appointment is. I mean, they are not, politicians are not normal people. You can't be normal to want to be Prime Minister. You must be very peculiar. And it's a very strange job to want to have. You're wrong. Anything you do is wrong. At least half the country disagrees with what you're doing. Or maybe not half, maybe 45%. Why would you want to do that? It's much more fun being a PR man and being liked by everybody.
But in terms of, but in terms of them trying to understand what the public want, if they can't meet with them, then presumably they have to look to research. And again, in the book, apart from saying that occasionally you made up research to suit your point of view, you talk about research.
We used to do that in advertising as well, Trevor.
Good heavens.
Yeah. And PR. Oddly enough.
In terms of using research, you talk about it kind of creating a kind of, well, just a sort of a centralising force, and you end up with a blandness. I mean, do you think that's one of the things that's beset politics, that there's too much research, which has mitigated against leadership?
Oh, yes. But that, if your concept of leadership is to ask people where they want you to lead them, then you're not exactly doing leadership, are you? Leadership is about standing up and saying, I want to go over there, come with me. And if they come with you, then you're popular. If they don't come with you, you're not. Most politicians aren't prepared to lose an election. I mean, the best part of the whole book actually is the quote that I gave about Margaret, which nobody ever believes, but it's true. When we were sitting in her office when she was leader of the opposition, and she said to me, I understand that you know lots of tricks that will get me elected. And I said, well, I don't know that I do. She said, well, don't use any of them, because if the people don't want me, it won't work. Now, can you imagine David Cameron saying that? Can you imagine Ed Miliband saying that? Can you imagine David Axelrod telling him that? Can you imagine Linton Crosby telling Cameron that? It's absolute. They're not interested. They're only interested in winning.
But did you use no tricks then?
No tricks whatsoever. We told the truth. You actually said it. I mean, it's very sweet of you to say that I will tell the truth, and you are absolutely right. My girlfriend, who I'm extremely fond of at the moment, I am. But it depends whether she's got dinner for me when I get home. No, she always says that the problem is that you tell the truth, and you're not allowed to tell the truth, and that's what's wrong with political correctness. People are no longer allowed to tell the truth. They have to pretend. I remember when before Margaret became Prime Minister, there was a huge ruckus about devaluation. And James Callaghan was the Prime Minister. Well, no, he wasn't. He was the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And they said to him on a Tuesday, are you going to devalue the pound? And he said no. And he did the next day. Now, I can understand why he said no, because if he'd said yes, then he might have devalued it at that moment, because the effect of what he said would do that. But he didn't. He waited until he was ready to do it. Now, I can sort of understand telling that kind of untruth, but I can't see the point in... I don't believe for a moment that Cameron thought that he would get immigration down into tens of thousands. I don't think he could possibly. He's either that or he's stupid. He didn't look at any of the numbers and didn't look at how they worked. The fact is they're going up all the time. And you know, people talk about immigration. What they're actually talking about is overcrowding. They're not talking about immigration at all. We live in a tiny little island. It's absolutely crammed with people. When you walk down the street, you can hardly get on the pavement. You can't get on a tube in London. You can't get on a bus in London. You can't go to a restaurant. They're all completely full. The hotels are always all completely full. It's completely crowded.
But most of the people who are complaining about immigration don't live in London. Actually, ironically, that's not where the anti-immigration vote is coming from. They live in places that have got very few immigrants.
I don't know if you're right about that, actually. The reason it doesn't come from London, is because they're all immigrants. They're not going to be against it.
Just moving around a little bit, we talked about politicians being under this phenomenal pressure, stress, and being a little weird. You describe in the book, towards the end of sort of Thatcher's time, she was under enormous pressure, and you were with a colleague at Chequers, and basically she drank a lot and collapsed, more or less. Clearly part of the stress that she was under. Were you ever actually worried for her mental health, particularly?
Well, actually, the true story about that has got nothing to do with the fact that she drank rather a lot and collapsed. Michael Dobbs, the author of House of Cards, for those of you who don't know who he is, was actually pouring the drinks. I told the story, and the authors of the book, the two guys who listened to the interviews and wrote it all down, didn't quite tell it right. Because what actually happened, he was standing pouring whiskey into a glass, and he said, how much? And she said, plenty, meaning that's enough. But he thought she meant plenty. So he filled it up, and she, because she was rather sort of prone to doing things quickly, she grabbed the glass of neat scotch about that big and went, glub, and that didn't do any good. Actually, she went out of the room and stuck her finger down her throat and was as sick as a dog, and then she came back and was in a very bad temper. I don't recommend it as a way of getting past drunk.
That's a picture of Mrs. Thatcher that's quite hard.
Yes,
but you weren't actually, seriously, you weren't concerned about her mental health then?
I mean, it was never bothered about her mental health. She got a little bit, what's the right word? She got more intolerant as she got older, as you tend to do. Well, one tends to do, sorry. And so she was a bit harder on people, a bit short. She was quicker with the handbag, and she was quicker to slap people down, and she didn't listen as much as she used to.
Sort of slightly staying on that theme of these exceptional people, there's a quote here you said about Frank Lowe and Charles Saatchi. I'm sure everybody's heard of Charles Saatchi. Frank Lowe is a very famous ad man as well, who in fact Tim worked with at one point. They had a business together. Frank Lowe and Charles Saatchi both were uncomfortable with being in the limelight, and they both had a degree of narcissistic reclusive egotism, which meant that they could be rude, unsympathetic bullies. Why don't you say what you think? Do you think that exceptional people...
Frank thought that was a compliment, actually.
I mean, do you think, though, seriously, that exceptional people can ever be completely normal? I mean, people often talk about sort of footballers surprised at the behaviour they are, but they've risen to the very, very top of their game.
Well, I mean, what makes them extraordinary is they're extraordinary. They're not like ordinary people, they're different. And they tend to be exaggerated. Parts of their personality are exaggerated, parts of their attitudes are exaggerated, and they have very quick emotional reactions to things. And I don't think that you can look at somebody and say he's got the characteristics that will make him into a great person or a great woman or whatever, but I think you can look and you can see things in people which just set them apart from other people. Sometimes you get it wrong and you pick somebody who's just basically evil. And he's different from other people because he's nasty, seriously nasty. I fortunately haven't met very many of those. Well, I had a few as clients, but David Mallory, he got his comeuppance the other day. No, I don't know. I mean, look, I'm not a great judge of people. What I do is I'm flash. I'm charming and I flash. I drive big cars and I wear smart clothes and I go to flash restaurants. I still do it, but I don't do it as much as I used to. I stopped driving cars. I gave up driving 5 years ago, actually. So I'm out of touch with ordinary people now because I spend my whole life in the back of a chauffeur-driven limousine. Certainly not in the front. And that's the only thing I was any good at. I worked for a lot of people who were absolutely brilliant at doing the most extraordinary things. Charles Saatchi, I can remember watching him. Do you remember the world's favourite airline? Do you remember British Airways? A copywriter brought the layout into his office, and it said, "British Airways, the world's #1 airline." And he looked at it. He was playing Scrabble, actually, at the time with Jeremy Sinclair, the creative director. And he shouted at Jeremy and made up a word, and then crossed out #1 and wrote favourite. Now, the world's favourite airline is one of those slogans that has captured the imagination. And that's the only reason I've ever been in this business. Because this business is about saying things or showing pictures or having ideas which capture the imagination and make people act differently and behave differently. It's happened throughout life. Most of human life has developed through people having ideas. And sometimes those ideas are very pure and are fabulous. Sometimes they're not quite so pure and they can be difficult. I mean, there is the two sides of the nuclear question. Nuclear energy is clearly the cheapest energy there is and the cleanest there is. And at the same time, the nuclear fusion also creates bombs. You know, and that's one of the great dilemmas of human life. One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. And facing that dilemma, my answer to that is the only way you can live your life is that every time you're confronted with a choice, say to yourself, is that right or is that wrong? And if it's wrong, don't do it. And if it's right, do it. Now, having said that, I've done lots of wrong things in my life, lots of them, much chronicled, many. You know, and human beings are frail, and they will do wrong things. And that's why you have to have absolution.
But here we are in the Jesuit seminary.
I was just paying lip service.
Lip service to yes, where we are.
Just in case they're right.
Just before I hand it out, ask the questions from the floor, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of the communications business today. And first, just starting off with, I know you dislike the term spin doctors. You've always been described as a spin doctor. And again, in the book, you say that the media in particular refers to people like yourself, Mr. Campbell, as kind of Merlin, Svengali figures. So the media like to kind of put a layer of alchemy over the relationship between comms people and politicians. Two questions, really. Do you think the media actually overestimate the influence of comms people? And two, why do the media feel obliged to create this kind of mystery, Svengali, Merlin thing?
God, because they live in a world of fantasy. That's the reason they do it, because they live in a fantasy world. They're bored with the real world. There's no news in the real world. If they were only to print the news, it would be a very, very short newspaper, and it wouldn't go on very long, and the stories wouldn't be very interesting. So they have to embellish stories. I mean, they actually do exactly what advertising people do and what public relations people do. They embellish stories. They don't tell a story. They don't tell a story exactly as it happened. You know, when you're in a pub and you're with a friend of yours and his wife, and she says, "Do you remember last Thursday? It was Wednesday. Actually, no, it was Thursday. It was Wednesday. No, it was Wednesday. It was in the morning. No, it wasn't in the morning. It was in the afternoon." And you're sitting there thinking, "What the hell am I listening to any of this shit for? Why am I having to go through what it was last week? Will that do?" Well, if you read a newspaper like that, you'll find that 90% of the copy can be completely left out, and you'll still end up with just as much information as when you started out.
Get back to my question.
Oh, yes.
So, I mean, what is it?
The spin doctor argument.
I mean, for example, you said that with Mrs. Thatcher that you just told the truth, that there was no embroidering. So what was it you did then?
And that's,
what did you bring to the
I was
party?
afraid you were going to ask me that question. Somebody asked me that question the other day, and I really didn't know what to say. What did you actually do for her? I don't know. I made her feel good. She would discuss things with me, not government policy, but how ordinary people would, or how, as she called me, the man on the Clapham omnibus. As though I'd ever been on a Clapham omnibus in my life. And I once went on a tube, and I said to the driver, 34 Eaton Square, and he didn't know how to get there. Now, I made her feel good. When I chatted to her, told her she looked fantastic, told her the speech was brilliant, things like that. But I also told her when the speech was rubbish. And that's probably the only reason why she liked me, because I told her the truth.
Did you tell her sort of play down that? Or?
Yes, we used to say to her, if you want to, the little tricks of the trade that we use, like if you want to emphasize a point, lean into the microphone. If you want to sound a bit distant, lean back. If you want to be unfriendly, fold your arms. If you want to be open to people, sit like that. And all those kind of things, which people constantly tell me is the tricks of the trade, but actually they're rubbish. I mean, they're what people naturally do.
Not everybody does do them naturally.
Well, right, people who perform naturally. And look, advertising and public relations is show business. Somebody who handles an account is an impresario. Frank Lowe was a great impresario. He sat and created Hovis, Heineken, Hamlet. I mean, they all had to begin with H. But apart from that, he created the most fabulous advertising because he put together every sense you could. He would play music, he'd have famous people, he'd have unfamous people, he'd have great shots, great scenery. he was the original. We have to shoot it in the Bahamas, otherwise it won't work. And there are some of those things still go on. But no, I think that spin doctor. Let me try and answer a question about a spin doctor. The point about a spin doctor is that if I describe what I can see now, it will bear no resemblance to what Michael would describe if he were to describe what he can see. And we're both looking at the same thing, but from a different position. And all a spin doctor does is say, look, if you look at things this way, this is the conclusion you draw. If you look at them that way, this is the conclusion you draw. Hence you get the dodgy dossier.
So, I was going to, brings me to Alistair Campbell. I mean, particularly Alistair Campbell, written about in the media as this extraordinary, Machiavellian, powerful.
Yeah, but he lied.
But he lied. But he was that, or the media.
He dissembled.
So he dissembled.
Yes.
But was he a powerful Machiavellian figure? Did he have a big influence on Blair, or is actually a lot of the claimed his influence actually the media talking it up rather than he had a...
His relationship with Blair was exactly the same as my relationship with Margaret. He adored Blair. He thought Blair was the perfect person, that he would lead Britain into greatness, as opposed to Iraq. He may have mistook Iraq for greatness. And he thought that Blair had the answer to the question, what's it all about? And fortunately, Blair didn't know the answer to any of those things. Nor did Margaret. But then she knew she didn't. And that's really the important difference between them. Margaret had no ego whatsoever. She was never conceited. She never looked at her reflection in a mirror. She never walked around the place saying, but I said that, how dare you speak to me like that, I'm the Prime Minister. She abided with the conventions of the time, which was that you called her Prime Minister as opposed to Margaret, unless you were in private. He, if you remember, walked into Downing Street and said, call me Tony. And then Dave came along and said, call me Dave. So that's going to make 1 iota of difference. That is going to make them really, really effective at leading.
Moving on, just the last couple of questions before I open it up. In the book, again, you refer to, you say you kind of rather regret the Guinness. You didn't often know what you were getting into with Guinness. I completely forgot his name, the David Mellor.
Mellor, yeah.
Any other clients that you regret?
No, not really. I regret clients that I fail with, that I am not able to achieve what they wanted me to achieve. And I'm not going to make a list of those because I don't want to share it with anybody. Except my failures are my personal property. And I don't have any regrets about working for people who turned out to be bad people, or who said they were going to stop being bad people and then returned to being bad people, like Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus. I don't have any problem. I actually think that everybody's entitled to their advocate. Everybody accepts that however bad a criminal is, when he goes into court, he should be represented by somebody. And I think that there is another court, if you like, the court of public opinion, which has become more powerful than the judicial courts, because you can destroy somebody's life and reputation in the public domain, even though they're not found guilty in court. Nowadays, of course, we also find them guilty of the most fatuous things in the world, like Andrew Mitchell, who apparently had to lose his entire job because he called somebody a pleb, or maybe he didn't call somebody a pleb, I don't know. Frankly, if he had or hadn't, I couldn't care less. And I don't think 90% of the country could care less. I don't actually suppose that White Van Man was particularly upset by what Emily Thornberry said. But she got fired, not because of what he thought, but because Miliband thought it was embarrassing for him.
Yes, well, we could go. Just last couple of questions.
That's why they're pygmies. They're pygmies. They don't have any stature. They don't believe in anything. They don't have any convictions. They don't have any principles. They don't stand there and say, I stand for this.
Social media and Twitter.
Yes. Talking of, yes.
with social media, I mean, what do you think its lasting impact is going to be on PR and advertising?
Well, you know that social media was invented by Ayn Rand. And you were busy mentioning Ayn Rand. The other point about Ayn Rand, if you go to the headquarters of Facebook or Twitter or any of those social media, huge multi-billion-pound empires, they all have a photograph of Ayn Rand on the wall or a framed copy of Atlas Shrugged. Because Atlas Shrugged is, whilst it's a science fiction book, if you haven't read it, you really should read it, because then you'll understand everything about social media. It's about, Atlas Shrugged is about the creation of the superhero. It's about everybody becoming their own superhero. And that is what social media is. Social media is about making people who don't think they're important think they are important. They aren't. They still aren't important, but they think they are. And so they write all day long about what they're doing, where they're going, where they live, who they go out with, all those things. And they fill the social media with it, and all sorts of people read it, and then add their bits, and so it goes on. You've only got to look at any normal person's Facebook page. It's full of the most ridiculous photographs you've ever seen, that you wouldn't dream of showing to anybody in your right mind, but they all love it.
So, winding the sort of nice video forward 5-10 years, what will advertising and PR look like, do you think, as an industry in 5-10 years?
Well, the great thing about advertising and PR is that it's commercial art, and it's about selling ideas, and it will go on selling ideas. Nothing will ever stop it from being about ideas. The trouble is that a huge amount of it simply becomes wallpaper. And the number of ideas that there are in modern advertising is tiny. The number of great ideas in modern public relations is tiny. And there always was tiny. There was a great period, which I was lucky enough to be in, the golden era, the 70s, when we did produce things that absolutely changed people's lives. But there's no different to Workers of the World Unite, which formed the entire trade union movement around the world. 4 words.
Thank you. I want to put it out to the floor now. If you could put your hands up, and I'll try and pick people. So if one of the helpers could come and grab the microphone, please, to hand it around. If the microphone comes to you, can you say who you are and where you're from, please? I need a microphone. Just there. Yep, I'll take you there first. Okay? Yep, him. You take the microphone.
Him.
Okay. Should be on.
Good evening. I am Gabriel. I'm a Westminster PR student. I'm originally from Switzerland, which would be kind of my point to you in this regard. But coming from a country of 8 million people, obviously we live on grains and we work on political grains. And kind of one of our strengths as a country is the power of lobbying, because everybody has to agree with everything, and everybody has to agree with everyone. But for a country of 64 million people like the UK, let's say grayness guarantees governability, but it kind of makes the PR exercise rather dull. So wouldn't we lose in the excitement of life if governability stepped into the UK more? Do you reckon?
Well, I'm a great fan of Switzerland. They have one huge advantage. They've got everybody banks there. And they know where all the skeletons are. And they know where all the jewels are and all the hidden gold. And that gives them a huge advantage. It means everybody's very frightened of them. Nobody quite wants to go up against the Swiss. They also don't have a big army. They've got soldiers who dress in rather strange costumes. And they've got lots of mountains. But it's a very peaceful, nice place. I don't know. I think what happens. For me, this country has become very mediocre, and the standards have lowered and lowered and lowered, and the choices that you get are not very extreme. They're all choices in the same floppy bit in the middle, and I find that very dull. But then I don't make any secret about the fact that I find that very dull. And I usually say I'm a man of the right, and it's called that because it is. And the Latin for left is sinister, but I won't mention that. So I don't know. People try and make life colourful, but sometimes if you spend too much time on the colour and not enough time on the substance, then you end up with nothing.
Okay, thank you. Question there.
My name is John at Richmond University. Actually, my question is, could it be said that in this country, 1979, the election of 1979 was the beginning of modern political advertising? And I know in previous elections, political advertising was a feature. But given what is perceived to be the importance of it, I mean that 1979 is the turning point. And a subsidiary question is it true that Mrs. Thatcher did actually have voice lessons to lower her voice because it was felt that on television in particular, that her voice was too high?
The answer to your first question is we don't have political advertising in this country. The politicians have banned the use of television. We're not allowed to use television. It's utterly absurd. This is the country that stomps around boasting about its obsession with the freedom of speech and bans all political communication on television. I mean, it's mad. This is a country obsessed with censorship. If we did have political advertising, other than print advertising and outdoor advertising, then it would have been a watershed election.
You had posters. Labour is
and we produced some absolutely brilliant ideas that captured the imagination and made people behave differently. Although she personally didn't like Labour isn't working, she thought it was a bad joke. I told her it was a double entendre, and she said, "Oh, is it a double entendre, dear? I hope they get it." As to voice coaching, I'll tell you the true story about her voice. Gordon Rees, who was her publicity director, said, "You're going to have to make a lot of speeches now that you're leader of the party, and you really need to learn how to throw your voice. So what I think we should do is go and see Lord Olivier, because he's a very fine actor and he knows how to put his voice out." And so Gordon rang up Larry and said, "Can we come and see you? I'd like to bring Mrs. Thatcher so you can give her a few pieces of advice on speaking in public." And he said, "Yes, of course." So we came round and we went to see him. He lived in an apartment in Hampstead. And we sat in his apartment and his woman brought tea. And he talked about himself for an hour. He started off telling how he'd first gone on stage, went through all the different Shakespeare plays he'd done and various other things, and the Prince and the Pauper and everything. And then after about an hour, Margaret said, "I'm frightfully sorry, Lord Olivier, might I use the facilities?" He said, "Of course." And so she got up and went to the loo. And while she was out of the room, Gordon said to Larry, "Do you think you could talk?" And she would actually quite like some advice. "Do you mind talking to her about herself for a moment?" He said, "Oh my God, these bloody politicians, all they ever do is talk about themselves non-stop." That is the sum total of the advice she got.
Maybe black hair.
Hello. My name is Ariane. I'm Spanish. I study a Master's in International Communication and International Liaison and Communication at Westminster University. I would like to know how important is it for you to communicate strategically in order to reduce reputational damage? And if you could give me an example of this, if you had to shape the communications in some way in order to achieve this. Thank you.
Yes. Reputational damage reputation is what we do. That's what we're in the business of, is creating the reputation and the aura that surrounds something. The best reputations in the world are the most natural reputations, the people who actually have their own aura. But you need to be able to communicate that because it doesn't always come across to people. If you talk to people about politicians, they'll all say, yes, I know he's a boring fart, but if you actually met him, he's a really nice person. They say that about Ed Miliband. I don't think they say it about Nick Clegg, but they do say it about Ed Miliband. To communicate strategically, I don't know what that means. You see, a strategy is basically about deciding where you are now, where you want to be, and then you answer the question, how do you get there? And the how do you get there is, what do you say, who do you talk to, and where do you talk to them? That is the sum total of it. It's child's play, it's not very difficult. And now that you all know, you can take my job over.
I've written a whole book on that.
it's different people use different phrases for it. But if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, you can't achieve it. So if somebody's got a very bad reputation and you want to get them a good reputation, you probably can't achieve that. You can probably knock the edges off a negative reputation. I once was asked by Naomi Campbell's agent if I would act for her. And she said, I think she needs a positioning strategy. And I said, what about the most unpleasant fashion model the world's ever known? And she said, I don't think she's going to employ you. And I said, no, probably not, but it is true. Anyway, if you don't know where you're trying to get to, you can't possibly measure whether you succeeded or not. The interesting thing is nobody else knows where you're trying to get there. Where we've got now, where the industry is such an obsession of the media that it tells everybody what the politicians are trying to do. So Gordon Rees and I never told anybody what we were trying to do. We kept everything a secret. We targeted that our target audience was skilled and semi-skilled workers. It was people with aspiration. It was the wives of trade union leaders who were sick to death of their husbands being at home all the time instead of going to work and not getting any money. And obviously it was female because she was female. I know most of you don't think she was, but she was. That was the target audience, and we knew how to reach them because we could measure which publications reached who. We couldn't use television, which is what we wanted to use, except in a public relations sense. And that we were then restricted to television programs which were run by political commentators, whether it was Robin Day or whoever was doing it at that time. And we had to communicate strategically. Yes, we had to think about who we were trying to get to. We had to think about what we were trying to say to them, and we tried to do that. And I think we succeeded because I don't think anybody had any doubt that exactly what Margaret Thatcher stood for. They knew what she was going to do. No matter what the situation was, they knew that she was going to be a street fighter. They knew she was looking for conflict. They knew that she was a competent. They knew that she was hard. They knew she was tough. And that's what we put across. The other side of that coin, of course, was what the left attacked us with, which was that she was uncaring. She said she doesn't care. And we said, oh no, that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is resolute. It's now called compassion, I think. It's the biggest disease in the world. It's what has destroyed the wealth of the world, has destroyed the talent of the world. The whole world, there's this enormous left-wing groupthink about caring for people, which is just rubbish. People should care for themselves. That's what you're put on this earth for, stand on your own 2 feet. Oh, but supposing I can't, try. If you fall over, maybe I'll get somebody to help you.
The gentleman in the white shirt with the microphone.
Richard from Champion Communications. So she's gone from being on The Apprentice to being a Sun columnist. Katie Hopkins tweeted last week that this week, the Ferguson verdict was justice with bells on and got 30,000 new followers in Twitter. Is she evil or is she a genius?
Neither. She's a cheap shot commentator who said something that appealed to a few people. The Ferguson decision was a decision, a rule of law decision. What the President said is absolutely correct. That was the decision of the court. Whether you agree with it or not, you're absolutely free to disagree with it, but it is the rule of law. And if you don't have the rule of law, then you have chaos. So you have to have rule of law. Andrew Mitchell has had to accept that a completely stupid judge made a decision that said he did save Pleb when he didn't, and he's got to accept it, because that is the rule of law. And if you don't like the law, what you have to do is go and change it. I'm a legislator, funnily enough, and if I want to change the law, I can go and move a motion in the House of Lords. If I get support, it'll change. If I don't get support, it won't. That is the process that we live through. Rule of law is more important than democracy. It is a fundamental part of democracy, but it's more important. And the problem with what she did is that she's trying to take advantage of it. She's not saying that was a correct legal decision. She's trying to say it's more than that, and that's not right. That's just a cheap stunt.
Okay, the lady with the microphone, then we'll go to Nick, the gentleman with the glasses there, and I'll take one more after that.
Anne McManus from Delio Partners, management consultancy that helps stakeholders, boards engage with stakeholders. And I was wondering why you apologised for your FT interview, given that you advised your clients never to apologise.
I didn't actually apologise at all. I acknowledged my mistake. I did not apologise, and I never said I am sorry. What I said was I got caught and I shouldn't get caught. I'm not supposed to get caught by journalists who come in with every intention of trying to stitch me up. You know, when a journalist, this is a guy called, I forgot his name now, Henry something, from the FT, came in and he said, I want to do an interview with you about your book. And he walked in and he said, why are Brunswick bigger than you? I said, what the fuck has that got to do in my book? I don't even mention Brunswick in the book. And he said, no, but why are they bigger than you? I said, I don't know, because they've got more revenue. And then he said something, I can't remember what he said. And then I said to him, he said, what do you think about the financial crisis? I said, look, for God's sake, the bankers are all criminals. The whole lot should be locked up. Now, you tell me any of you disagree with that. You all agree with me, but unfortunately, the banking clients I had didn't agree with me. So I had to, and there were only a couple. I had to, and the guys in my office who look after financial clients, I don't do that. I look after geopolitical clients. Said to me, "You've ruined our lives. You ruined our entire career. We're going to lose all our clients." Actually, we didn't lose a single client. Because all of them, when I wrote to them privately and apologised, not publicly, and said, I understand entirely what a fantastic contribution you make to the wealth of the nation, and of course you should earn millions and millions and millions. It's bizarre. I mean, it's utterly bizarre. Ayn Rand did not write about bankers, incidentally. Didn't write about bankers. The big problem with capitalism is that what we see is bad capitalism. Good capitalism is very good. Bad capitalism is terrible. And the problem with human beings is that the devil is amongst us and he tempts us. He tempts us to overcharge. He tempts us to whack higher rates of interest, to pass one loan on to another. How can you sit there and actually say that subprime mortgages were proper behaviour? Not a single one of those heads of a bank got thrown out, got locked up. If you had stolen £45 million, you'd be in prison. But they're not. That's how much out of touch with the public politicians are.
Yes.
Nick Servant, I am a trainer of PR apprentices. I've got my star apprentice here tonight. It's always fascinated me that you, as a very successful ad man, moved over to the PR world. Was there a particular moment, perhaps during your conservative work, that you had an epiphany, this PR might be quite good as well?
If you want me really to tell you the truth, I'll tell you the truth. Yes. I worked with Frank Lowe in an advertising agency called Lowe, Howard, Swink and Bell. We bought a public relations company called Good Relations, which was run by a man called Tony Good, who had a stammer, which is not really the best thing to have if you're a public relations man. We worked for Good Relations. Mike was kidding himself laughing because he worked for him as well. And we bought that, and then one day Frank said to me, no, actually, the campaign did a front page article which said, Lowe, the year of the bell. and it said that I had resulted in their share price going up 45 pence or something, some rubbish like that. And he got terribly upset about it. He said, "You've got to leave." And I said, "I don't want to." He said, "Well, you can buy all the non-advertising businesses. After all, you wanted good relations." I said, "No, I didn't. You wanted it." And he said, "No." He said, "You buy it." So I bought all the public relations companies. Why did I go into public relations? Because I couldn't see. Well, if you want me to be really honest, I can't write an ad. I'm not a copywriter, I'm not an art director. I couldn't write an ad for love nor money. If you said to me, "Your whole life depends on it, you will now write a great ad," I'd die, because I can't do it. But boy, can I write a headline on a press release, and I can put a quote in somebody's mouth. And it suddenly occurred to me that, as the difference in advertising and public relations, as you will know being a trainer, is the use of third-party endorsement to inform and persuade, and the use of paid-for media to inform and persuade. Those are the classic definitions of public relations and advertising. However hard PR Week tried to find another definition, they can't find one. And there's no difference between them. But it is much easier to write a quote, not nearly as long-lasting to write a headline on a press release as it is to write an ad.
And our final question.
Tom, it's a pleasure to talk with you. Across the whole period of the Thatcher government, Bernard Ingham was there. I've only got to just after the coal strike in your book. So what's your view of Bernard Ingham across the whole, was it 10, 12 years?
Do you know, the funny thing is I only met him twice. I mean, they say he wasn't there at all in the first 6 years. Henry Phillips was the government spokesman. Then he suddenly came on board. I just never came across him because he was about government communication. I was about political communication. He said that he he didn't do political communication. He lied, of course, because he died in the war Tory. The worst kind. He came from Yorkshire. They're really, really nasty. And I didn't do government. I didn't do government. I mean, who wants to represent the government?
I just wondered whether the traffic through offices, stuff that comes together.
No, she occasionally used to ask his opinion and ask mine. Then she would tell me what he said, and I imagine she told him what I said. And he probably then said something rude, and I said something equally rude about what he said, and she just made her laugh. And he'd do whatever she wanted to do. He sat next to me at her funeral. He'd been, I don't know where he'd been actually, but he raked a Guinness, I think. And he said to me, "This is a very sad day." I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "What did you actually do for her?" I said, "All the things you didn't do." Because I couldn't think of it today. He's a nice man, though.
And on that bombshell, Lord Bell, thank you very, very much for your time.